DevOps Shorts, the show to listen to when your DevOps hurts. And even when you're going strong, it's short and sweet, so come along. Hello and welcome to DevOps Shorts, the show where we invite wonderful human beings to have a lightning-fast talk about devs, ops, and other mythical creatures. Each episode is only 15 minutes long, and we are focused around three main questions. So it's short and sweet. Why? Well, because if there's one thing we know is that great delivery comes in small batches. Our guest for today is Tobias Kunze. Did I get this right?
Yeah.
So Tobias was the tech founder of the company that later became known as OpenShift. Today, Tobias is the founder and the CEO of a startup called Glasnostic. Glasnostic is building a novel technology, and here I'll need my notes to put it right. So it's a novel technology for operators to provide their applications with instant resilience so developers can deploy more and the business stays up. Sounds great. Hello, Tobias. How are you today?
And I'm doing great. Thank you.
Wonderful. So without further ado, let's dive straight into our three questions. So we have three main questions, and our first question for today is very simple. Why do you love being in tech? Why do you love information technology? I have this stupid, naive assumption that you love what you do, and you can, of course, tell me, no, that's bullshit. I hate what I do, but I don't think that's the situation with you. So I'm starting the timer right now, and go.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for having me. So it's a really interesting question because I think the question should actually be something like, why wouldn't you be in IT, right? I think if you look back, it's the defining human innovation today. It's kind of and it has been for the past 20 years, 20 plus years. It's our time's renaissance. It's like, 200 years ago, we had the Enlightenment. You would be kind of weird not to love the Enlightenment, right? Or Industrial Revolution was a great event. That is the event of your time. I think IT is the event of our time. There are many other things that are interesting, but IT is the defining piece, I think, at least of our lifetime. But on a more personal level, what I really like about it is the crafting of things, and that the personal challenges that come with that. It's personal, and it's also the intellectual challenge of that, right? So, my background is in arts. I started out as a trained classical musician. I'm studied composition and conducting, orchestral conducting, and then very straight line for me. From there, went to digital sound synthesis, programming VAXs of all things. Then dabbled in algorithmic composition, like there's a lot of confusion going on around that, obviously. Then worked at SGI, Silicon Graphics, when it was a great company. And then from there on, just startup after startup, never looked back really. So what I mean by that crafting is that, they're the artsy types, and it's often very, it's navel gazing, right? Often you're trying to craft something that becomes perfect, right? In science, you're trying to adapt to something that's extremely slow moving, if at all, right? You're looking for natural laws, right? But in engineering, we make things possible, right? We do things that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And it's a continually changing and rapidly changing environment we live in, right? And that really makes it very challenging and exciting, right? So if you think back as a kid, there's all these kids that do, love watercolors, the kids that love building models. I was a kid that would do the Lego, right? You build something, and then once you have it, roughly, you discover, oh, there's something else I could build on top of that. It's you never reach the end. It's a continual process. And that is very similar in IT, right? In technology, because even if we look at changes coming in as disruptive and annoying, and I just built this, now I need to change that, that's the nature of things. And in IT, we're living this every single day, right? It's the intellectually challenging way of having to form new code, write new code, form new hypotheses, and then test it on the reality. And the reality comes back with changes, right? And it's a continual loop. So how do you adapt continually? How do you craft continually? That is really what it's all about.
Poking the reality and seeing what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're very well, very good with time. You have 10 seconds left, and we'll stop the timer right here. Okay, and go straight to the next question. So, what was your DevOps aha moment? That's the second question. In DevOps Handbook, each of the authors described their DevOps aha moment. That moment when they realized that the way things work in IT really actually sucks, but there is a better way. So I suppose you two had this moment someday in your career, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so for me, I think it was a very slow aha movie. So a moment, right? So it was more like an it took place over years. So when we built Makara, which was really the company that became OpenShift, right? We were super laser focused on how can we make it easier to for the developer to build applications, right? Support the building of applications. And that meant we build in all lifecycle management into the platform. It's all baked in. Monitoring is baked in, right? Incident resolution baked in. That, of course, had natural limits, right? And those limits were much more narrow than I expected initially. And then when we started hosting this as like a public OpenShift in a multi-tenant environment, of course, and it became very apparent that none of these operational knobs and levers that we exposed were really that useful for developers, because as it happens in multi-tenant environments, you're already facing something that has nothing to do with your code. It's the environment, right? And so I call this a vertical domain, right? We think as developers and as engineers, computer science types, as in horizontal thread of execution problems, right? And that's what we're focused on. That's what the debugging is all about. That's what the tracing is all about. That's what observability is all about. What does my code do, right? And then you discover all of a sudden that that's the least of your problems, right? A bug, finding a bug, debugging it, fixing it, anybody can do this after like a week of programming, right? Actually, you start out doing that, right? But you can start finding problems in other people's code that very, very quickly. The real problems are those vertical problems that are not a thread of execution problems, right? And there are disciplines in computer science and programming where that is an issue, of course, like thread programming, parallel programming, right? Things happen outside of your thread of execution, right? We can think only thread of execution, but the interesting problems are all outside of it. And with cloud and microservices, and of course, like parallel development, you split up, out in two pizza teams. That's the defining problem of our time, right? So I think my aha moment was that looking at it and seeing there's this nature versus nurture debate that nobody wants to have in engineering and software engineering. And the nature is the code that I'm writing, the genetic code that I put in place. That is almost meaningless, right? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. There's millions of ways of writing this code, right? It's just a function that I expose. But the really defining problem is how do I nurture it? How do I operate it? How do I bring this in? Because ultimately nothing exists in isolation, right? So the aha moment, I think I would describe as realize that successful applications are not successful because they're well engineered. They become successful only because they're operated well. Right? Engineering is needed, not saying that's not an important piece, but it's a very small piece. And we tend to overthink that piece. So I would say the vertical domain, that's what it's all about. Getting a hold of the environmental patterns.
I love that picture you painted. What I really envisioned when you were talking, I saw code as a grain, and when a grain falls into a fertile soil, then something grows from that. And if a grain falls onto a dry earth, then nothing good will come out of it. So we can say
very exactly. That's a much better picture.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Exactly.
Now, next question, the third question. And this is the most exciting question for me, because I like to describe myself as a software delivery futurist. So the next question will be about the future. What do you think is next for DevOps and the IT industry? This is your chance to look into the future. You can talk about, the day after tomorrow, or you can talk about, what happens 5, 10, 20 years from now. Just go wild. Whatever comes to your mind, I want to hear it, because you're the one dealing with technology, so you probably have a vision of where all this is going.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I mean, obviously I founded Glasnostic, and I wouldn't have done it if I wouldn't have like very specific opinions on that space. So take that, all that with a grain of salt. Yeah. But building on what I said earlier, the vertical domain, the environmental factors, right, the operational concerns that matter. I think the defining piece over the next couple of years, not 10 years, 2 years, is that I think we're going to see in the larger organizations, not talking about the 10-person San Francisco startup or Tel Aviv startup, right? It's you have one product, you have one application, that's it. Right? You're not dealing with complexity. You may deal with scale and other technical issues that are also important in their own right. But from a larger perspective, I think we're looking at a cultural shift where the operations groups become the kingmakers, right? We've been living in this paradigm. Developers are the new kingmakers for about 10 years now. Red Monk brought out the book on that topic. I think that pendulum needs to swing to the operations side, and also in the organization that the business folks need to start talking to the operations folks first, before they talk to the developers, right? Because development is really we talked about like, it's done. The 1,000 definitions of done, right? As a developer, I can't oversee the entire complexity of delivering something to the customer all the way, right? The last centimeter, the last inch there. I'm kind of done when it works on my laptop. And from then on, all that delivery, all that business continuity, disaster recovery concerns, all these other pieces that come to it, those are increasingly the important pieces. And certainly for the business, right? The business is not interested in when is your commit going to happen there, right? And are we done with a happy path now? Or what else is needed afterwards, right? The business really wants to know, when can I sell it? So the operations groups know that, right? So I'm looking again in the two-dimensional space where development is spread of execution, operations is a vertical dimension, environmental factors. We have now more and more interest in resilience engineering. I think we're going to see resilience operations, right? Some things you do in code, compensation strategies, the vast majority of things, noisy neighbors, ripple effects, compound failures, grade failures in general, all these things that bring your application down and bring your business down need to be done on the operational side in runtime. Right? So environmental controls in real time.
Great answer. Okay, so operations is the future, and we're out of time. This is
excellent.
Okay, thank you for watching this. Thank you, Tobias. Too many gongs are going off altogether. And it was really fun chatting with you. A lot of interesting stuff to work on, and I'll get in touch later on for the show notes, because you've mentioned a few things I'd like to put in the show notes. Thanks, Tobias.
It was a pleasure being here. Thanks, Anne.
Short and sweet. Thank you for listening, and watch out for new episodes of DevOps Shorts.